Welcome to Cause Before Symptom, uncovering the real cabal and spiritual forces that are controlling the world. And now, here is your host, James Carner.
Welcome to Cause Before Symptom. I'm your host, James Carner. Today is March 7th, 2026, and I'm 12 minutes late. Sorry about that, guys. I have no excuse. I slept. I was, dude, napping hard, dude, like snoring hard. It was like, time got away with me, but, that's how it is now. I have no idea what to do with myself. Yeah, there you have it. Well, anyway, hey, that's not a bad thing, all right? Life is good. I'm not complaining. I'm just not on it today, Anyway, tonight we're going to be talking about the dollar, oil, and war, and why this conflict is likely temporary, so you guys can just chill and not have to freak out about this. Now, as headlines fill the air, guys, with warnings of global war, many people are asking whether the world is about to spiral into a conflict that could last for years. Well, missiles created an atmosphere where the fear spreads faster than understanding, right? Yet when the systems behind the headlines are examined carefully, the situation begins to look less like a runaway catastrophe and more like a period of intense geopolitical pressure. Now, this broadcast steps back from panic to examine the machinery underneath the crisis. It explores why the Strait of Hormuz matters to the global economy, how energy markets interact with the dollar-based financial system, and why the sudden reappearance of Venezuelan oil in global discussion is not accidental. It also examines the rise of BRICS as the competing economic bloc and why defense manufacturing and military pressure often surge during periods of financial uncertainty. Rather than promoting speculation, tonight we talk about what separates, and the program separates basically what is documented. This is like documented information here. And what also appears strategically plausible and what remains unknown. There are certain things that we just don't know, but we can take really good, high educational guesses. And by examining energy supply chains, global currency dynamics, and the structure of modern military pressure campaigns, well, the broadcast provides a very clear picture of why conflicts like this often emerge during periods of economic transition. Now, most importantly, this is going to offer you guys some perspective. It explains how pressure campaigns differ from long-term occupation wars and why many modern confrontations between powerful nations are designed to reach a threshold of leverage rather than continue indefinitely. And by identifying the signals here that historically appear before governments begin stepping back from conflict, well, the program gives listeners a framework for understanding when de-escalation is likely to begin. Now, in a time when fear dominates the conversation, this episode aims to replace panic with clarity. By understanding how oil, finance, and geopolitics intersect, you guys can see that the current conflict, while dangerous, is part of a larger system adjusting to new economic realities rather than the beginning of an endless war. Shout out to everybody on the live chat Rumble. Number one warrior is Scorpion saying, hi, y'all. Glad to be back with the Warriors tonight. Glad to have you back. What's up, pal? Number two warrior is Boots Hafner, Sparkin Spleefer. What's going on, my friend? He says, hello, Pastor James, voice of Rumble Airwaves and creator of award-winning detoxifier, elitepotion.com. Hello, Warrior family. Glad to see y'all here, and let's help out our host by hitting that thumbs up button. Yeah, that really helps, even when I'm running late and you're not too happy about me and you don't want to give me a thumbs up, it really does help, though. If you could do me a favor, just take your thumb, follow me, hit the X button, then hit thumbs up, then live chat. Or if you're watching live, just go down and hit the thumbs up button. Or not live, but, a taped version. And number 3 warrior is Noel 1888. He says, good morning, good evening. What's going on, my friend? All right, guys, let's get into breaking news.
Welcome to Shitty Breaking News with your host, James Carner, offering his shitty opinion.
Well, Trump says Iran targets will expand, honors the U.S. troops killed in the war. I'm giving it a couple weeks, maybe another month, maybe 2 months tops. That's where I'm going with it. United Arab Emirates and Kuwait start oil output cuts after Hormuz blockage. This is good because, hey, they want to raise the price of crude oil, all right? 80 a barrel isn't going to work now with the inflation that's happened to America. Yeah, they need to raise it, and that's just how it happens. After a president-filled celebration, I guess Reverend Jesse Jackson's family gathered for intimate final goodbye. Oh, okay, well, didn't he die already? Well, Jesse Jackson's dead. Trump, Hegseth claim Iran bombed girls' school, not the U.S. Well, of course they're going to say that. Yeah, because, it'll make justification for bombing Iran. Huge fire engulfs Kuwait City Tower as Trump accuses Starmer of seeking to join wars after we've already won. So I guess we won. Well, it looks like they did bring in a 4th. Ayatollah said, yeah, I guess I'll be the Ayatollah. So there you have that. Trump assembles a new coalition to eradicate cartels. Cartels meaning anyone who has oil underneath their feet. And they're calling it, what are they calling it? What are they calling it? Oh, they won't let me. It's New York Times. Bunch of assholes. You got to pay for our news. I mean, it's like, you got to pay us to lie to you. That's the New York Times. No. We used to be free online. Now you got to pay us to lie to you. And there you have it, folks. That's the shitty breaking news. All right, when we come back, we're going to basically de-escalate the war about the dollar, the oil, and Iran, and all that bullshit. So chill out, guys. Everything's going to be okay, I promise.
Why do 75% of people feel exhausted all the time? The answer might surprise you. In the 1920s, Standard Oil decided to dive into medicine. They pushed synthetic petroleum into our drugs. Sure, it masked symptoms, but it wrecked our guts. Our good bacteria, which fight off parasites and heavy metals, got wiped out by crude oil. But here's the good news. We can fix this by going back to nature. Introducing Elite Potion, the world's top detox program. It restores your good bacteria by removing toxic threats like aluminum, strontium, barium, and parasites. Imagine feeling energized and alive again. They said there couldn't be a pill that did it all. We invented it. Visit elitepotion.com and reclaim your health from synthetic pharmaceuticals. Your body will thank you.
Every year, millions of Americans sign a contract they don't even know exists. They think it's just another tax return, but that signature means something far deeper. It starts with that first job at 16. The system takes a piece of her check, then promises to give some back if she signs the return. Every April 15th, the same cycle repeats, not by law, but by belief. The system didn't bind them, their own signature did. Learn the truth at unincorporatedassociations.com.
All right, we're back, and we're going to be talking about the Iran war, why we should not freak out, because I basically have a plausible explanation here. Now, there are moments in history when the noise becomes so loud that people can no longer hear the truth through it. That's what's going on right now. I mean, we've got people in my town standing on top of bridges saying no kings and free Palestine, and thinking that that's going to stop Trump. Yeah, it ain't gonna do dick. It's just not, okay? My show's about cause, not symptoms. And if you protest against symptoms, you're never going to get to the point. And I've told you guys over and over and over, if you want to get the bad boys, go after the black nobility and protest in front of their mansions and go after the Bank for International Settlements, right? So, but when you throw noise at the noise that they create as a symptom, it ain't gonna do crap. So every headline begins to sound like the end of the world, which everybody is freaking out about. And missiles are being launched, ships reroute, markets shake. And suddenly the conversation everywhere turns to one question. Is this the beginning of a war that will consume everything? Well, right now, that is the atmosphere that many people are living in, and the news cycles move at lightning speed. Commentators speak with certainty about things that are still unfolding, and fear spreads faster than understanding. People begin to imagine worst-case scenarios because no one is slowing the story down long enough to examine what it actually is happening beneath the surface. But history teaches something very important. When the world appears most chaotic, it is often because powerful systems are pushing against each other. Energy markets, financial systems, military alliances, and economic blocs all move at the same time. And when those forces collide, when worlds collide, ha, you ready to go? Ha, you ready to say? Ha, you ready, baby? I had to do that for Boots. He absolutely wants me to hit that button every time. Yeah, that's for you, Boots. Yeah. Anyway, when those forces collide, the result can look like sudden disorder, right? Yet in reality, those events are usually the visible symptoms of deeper structural pressure that has been building for years, okay? Countries, corporations, and dynasties are not going to play nice, okay? I don't know. Maybe it's because we've been so privileged in America for so long without having anybody kick our ass that we're just like, you know, a bunch of pussies and like, oh God, oh, I cannot believe it's happening. Oh, you know, when, dude, if you were just walking the streets during the Wild West, you wouldn't worry about a bullet flying past your head. It's normal. But that's what happens when you raise a generation of pussies. So the conflict that we're watching right now, it sits at the intersection of several of those pressures, okay? Energy routes that carry enormous portions of the world's oil supply are under threat, okay? And global financial systems that are built around the US dollar are being quietly challenged by emerging economic blocs, like different people who want to buy oil and sell it. That's BRICS. Now, nations that once cooperated are now actually testing the boundaries of power and influence. And they're getting kind of tired of America's bullshit, and I get it. Now, when those forces move at the same time, tensions become almost inevitable. Yet tensions does not always mean catastrophe. In many cases, it means pressure. You see, governments apply pressure when they want to force negotiations, restore deterrence, or remind rivals where the boundaries lie. And these campaigns can be intense and dangerous, but they are often designed to reach a point of leverage rather than to expand endlessly. And that's exactly what's going on. If you see me over here, like I got this hair, it keeps tickling me while I'm talking, and that's what, and I keep forgetting to get it. You know, sometimes I wonder if I just shave off the whole mustache, will I look different or ugly? I don't know, but I'm in a very weird time in my life where why not? So tonight's broadcast is not about dismissing the seriousness of what's happening. It is serious. And people are dying. I get that. And missiles and markets both carry real consequences. And I'm sorry, but I'm not doing it. All right? You're not doing it either. So let's not blame me or yourself for all this crap. Instead, the purpose of this conversation is to step back and examine the machinery behind the headlines. Why oil routes like the Strait of Hormuz matter so much. Why does it matter? Why Venezuela suddenly appears in discussions about global energy supply when it rarely was talked about before. Why economic alliances like BRICS are being discussed alongside the dollar systems. Now, when those pieces are understood together, the picture becomes clearer. The world is not simply sliding into chaos. It's navigating a period of transition where financial power, energy security, and geopolitical influence are being negotiated in real time. And when we understand the system, fear begins to lose its grip. Because history shows that these moments, while loud and frightening, often lead to negotiation once the pressure reaches its peak. Now, governments rarely fight forever, and eventually the economic cost, well, the diplomatic pressure and the risk of escalation force leaders to look for an off-ramp. And I think they're going to be finding it here soon, okay? And what America has been doing, people are bitching and whining and complaining, but all of the leaders around the world, they know exactly what's going on. And they're just playing with the game. So tonight we slow the story down. We examine the forces moving beneath the headlines. And instead of asking whether the world is ending, we are going to be more, we're going to ask basically more useful questions. What pressures are shaping this conflict? And how long do these pressures usually last? And understanding that answer may do something very important for you guys. It may replace panic with perspective. And sometimes perspective is the most powerful antidote to fear. Now, 2-3 years ago, I probably would have been panicking too, going, oh my God, it's World War III. Dude, ever since I started my show, ever since I started learning more about the Bible, ever since I started seeing patterns and God's given me more wisdom and discernment, I have been slowing down on that because I'm finding more and more peace in my heart, and I want you guys to have that peace. Because to be honest, if it happens, I'm going to be okay. That's where I came to be in my life. If World War III happens, I'm going to be okay. I want you guys to be okay too. And that's what this show's about. It's not only exposing, evil. It's not only finding the cause of all kinds of problems and exposing that, but it's also showing you guys that what the Bible teaches is we are not to fear. We are not to worry. In fact, I'm going to be, over the years, teaching you that worrying is a sin. So before anyone can understand the current conflict, they have to understand something very simple but often ignored, that modern civilization still runs on oil. Did you know this? I mean, if you look at everything that's around you, right? Look at the clothes that you wear. Yeah, clothes. They make some clothes made out of oil. There are plastics and just anything. Your chair, your mouse, your laptop, your speakers, your garbage can, your light fixtures. I mean, your doorknobs. I mean, everything. Dude, there's plastic in everything. Everything. It is so highly used that Venezuela's pumping out 1 million barrels a day. 1 million barrels a day. That's a lot. Okay? So modern civilization still runs on oil. Can you see it? I see it. And despite all the conversations about green energy and technological progress, which is just a way of the elites trying to bankrupt BRICS. That's what it is. The engines of the global economy remain deeply tied to petroleum. There's nothing we can do right now about that. Not until they release the hydrogen information, okay? Because hydrogen, we can replace oil overnight. But ships that move goods across oceans burn it. Aircraft that connect continents depend on it. Trucks that deliver food, materials, and equipment across countries run on it. Agriculture itself depends on fuel for tractors, fertilizers, and transportation. We even eat the stuff. We do. We eat petroleum. We spray it on, it's, that PAM spray on pans. That's petroleum. We eat the shit. So oil is not just another commodity. It is the bloodstream of the modern economic system. And because of that reality, the places where oil travels become incredibly important for the money grabbers, the bankers, the money changers. And certain geographic locations function like valves, like on, off, in the global energy system. And when those valves operate smoothly, the world barely notices them. Like, when was the last time you heard of the Strait of Hormuz? But when tensions rise around them, governments, markets, and militaries immediately begin paying attention. And these narrow passages of water where massive volumes of energy flow every day are called choke points. Choke points. Right now, the Strait of Hormuz is called a choke point. And they are among the most strategically sensitive places on Earth. Now, one of the most important of these choke points is the Strait of Hormuz. And if I'm not pronouncing it right, I don't care. This narrow waterway sits between the Persian Gulf and the Gulf of Oman. It is not very wide, yet an enormous portion of the world's oil supply, 20%, moves through it every single day. Tankers carrying crude from countries like Saudi Arabia, Iraq, Kuwait, and the United Arab Emirates, UAE, must pass through this corridor before reaching global markets. And when everything is calm, those shipments move quietly and efficiently. When conflict threatens that route, the entire world notices almost immediately. And then the news comes in beating the war drum. And hate Trump, hate Trump, hate Trump. It's hilarious. So the reason is simple. Energy markets react to risk faster than almost anything else in the global economy. If traders believe that oil shipments might be disrupted, prices begin rising within hours. Have you noticed? Yeah, the prices of all oil all across America went up anywhere between 20 cents to $1. Like that. Now, insurance companies, they charge more to cover tankers entering the region. Why? Because it's a war zone right now. And shipping companies may reroute vessels or delay departures. And governments begin preparing emergency reserves in case supplies actually tighten. So what started as a regional military problem quickly becomes a global economic concern. So this is why conflicts near major oil routes rarely stay local for long. Even nations far away from the region feel the effects. And higher fuel prices affect transportation, manufacturing, and food production. Airlines adjust ticket prices. Shipping companies raise freight costs. The ripple spreads outward through the entire global supply chain. So in many ways, oil choke points act like pressure gauges for the world's economy. And when the tension rises around them, the entire system begins to respond. So understanding this dynamic should help explain why powerful countries pay such close attention to these locations. Protecting energy routes has been a strategic priority for decades. Naval patrols, regional alliances, and military bases have often been positioned specifically to keep these corridors open. And governments understand that if these routes are closed or threatened for long periods of time, the economic consequences would be enormous. So this is the first piece of the puzzle. And when we see conflict appearing near major oil routes, it is not simply about territory or ideology or even religion. It's about the stability of the global energy system itself. as oil remains one of the central pillars of modern civilization, and the places where it flows will always carry enormous strategic importance. So once this is understood, the next question becomes clearer. If oil is the bloodstream of the global economy, then what currency is used to move that bloodstream through the financial system? Well, that question leads directly to the second piece of this story, the relationship between energy markets and the global dollar system. Now, if oil is the bloodstream of the global economy, then the next question becomes obvious. What currency moves the bloodstream through the financial system? Well, for the past half century, the answer was and has been largely the United States dollar, the Federal Reserve. This relationship between oil and the dollar has shaped global finance in ways that most people never see. Yet it quietly influences almost every major economic decision made by governments. Now, after the upheavals of the 1970s energy crisis, a financial structure emerged in which most international oil sales were priced and settled in US dollars. Meaning the energy crisis back in the 70s, they knew that oil was going to change even more because we started using plastics more and started using it in food. And there they had to make a crisis about oil so they could raise the prices for us. Because, hey, they knew that oil was going to be hot for the next couple hundred years. So back then, oil was, what, $20 a barrel or something in the 70s? And that can't happen. So they got to create a crisis to raise the money. It's just greed. So that meant that any country buying large quantities of oil needed access to dollars, US dollars. They had to trade their currency in for US dollars just to get the oil, okay, in order to pay for those shipments. So importers had to hold dollar reserves. They had to hold actual dollars in banks to make change or to send money from A to B. So the dollar was hot. People were using it because oil was the most traded thing in the world. And then importers had to hold dollar reserves, and banks had to facilitate dollar transactions, and financial markets around the world began operating within that framework. Naturally, the dollar wouldn't die. Didn't need to go back up now. It's backed by crude oil. So over time, this arrangement created a very powerful feedback loop. And countries needed dollars to buy energy, so they accumulated dollar reserves. Those reserves were often invested in U.S. financial assets, such as treasury bonds. They have to buy treasury bonds, okay? This forced them to. And as more nations participated in this system, the dollar became deeply embedded in the plumbing of global trade. So it was no longer just the currency of one nation. The dollar, became the primary language of international finance. And because of that system, movements in the oil market can have ripple effects through global finance. And when oil prices rise sharply or when supply becomes uncertain, countries importing energy often need larger amounts of dollar liquidity to secure their purchases. Now, banks facilitate those transactions. Traders adjust their currency positions. And financial markets respond to the shifting demand for dollars. Now, this does not mean that energy conflicts automatically strengthen the dollar forever. Over very long periods of time, many factors influence currency strength, including economic growth, debt levels, and trade balances. But during moments of energy disruption, the existing dollar-based infrastructure tends to become more visible, like right now. And the mechanisms that move oil around the world are closely connected to the mechanisms that move dollars through financial markets. So understanding this connection should help explain why energy routes and financial systems often appear in the same geopolitical conversations. When policymakers discuss protecting shipping lanes or stabilizing energy markets, they are not only thinking about fuel supplies. They are also thinking about the broader financial architecture that depends on those flows remaining predictable. So at the same time, this structure has began facing new pressures. Several large economies have started exploring alternative payments, systems, and trade arrangements that could reduce reliance on the existing dollar-based framework. They started using BRICS, like when Saudi Arabia started taking the yuan. That fucked it all up. Well, I didn't do it. Now, these initiatives are still developing, and the dollar remains deeply entrenched in global finance. Yet the conversation itself reveals that the international financial landscape is gradually evolving. And most people don't want to know this. So for the moment, however, the dollar still sits at the center of most global energy transactions, and oil shipments move through physical choke points like the Strait of Hormuz, or Hormuz. I like Hormuz. Strait of Hormuz. Hormuz. I think it's Hormuz. But they also move through financial channels built on dollar liquidity and international banking networks. So when energy markets tighten, those financial channels often become more important rather than less. So what we're seeing is the Federal Reserve is flexing right now, saying, I was the big guy on campus and you are screwing me. That's what's happening. So now, this is why discussions about oil, war, and currency frequently overlap. Energy supply affects the real economy, while currency systems govern how that economy is financed. And when pressure appears in one part of the system, it often spreads into the other. And again, this is why people are panicking, running around, throwing on their masks and freaking out, and literally thinking the world's going to end. Now, with the connection in mind, this connection. Wait, I'm going to take a step back here. You guys are talking about Elite Potion. TikTok won't let me plug it. No, they won't. And Boot says, yep, TikTok wants their cut of the sales, right? Well, they do. So with this connection in mind, a new question begins to emerge. If the dollar-centered financial structure has dominated global trade for decades, which it has, what happens when large economic blocs begin exploring alternatives? Well, that question leads directly to its next piece of the story, the growing discussion around BRICS and the search for new financial pathways. Financial pathways that don't charge as much interest as a dollar. So in order to understand the broader tension behind the current movement and the moment itself, it is important to recognize that the global financial system is not static. For decades, the international economy has operated through a framework dominated by Western financial institutions, dollar settlement systems, and the banking networks connected to them. So this structure developed gradually after the Second World War and expanded significantly during the late 20th century as globalization accelerated. Yet, as the 21st century has unfolded, several large economies have begun exploring ways to operate with greater independence from that framework. And we are seeing the death of the New World Order, or the death of globalism. Okay, we're seeing the World Economic Forum is not gaining traction anymore. All the young economic leaders are retiring or dying out. So this means competition's coming in. And this means the Federal Reserve has been making all this money for all these years. They're going to start, beating the war drum. And this is a warning, but it's also a way of reckoning the oil back to the inflation that we started. So among the most discussed of these efforts is the economic grouping group called BRICS. Economic grouping known as BRICS. Now, that's Brazil, Russia, India, China, and South Africa, along with additional countries that have recently expressed interest in joining the bloc. And they keep happening too. In fact, I believe Texas, the state of Texas, asked to join BRICS. Yeah, it's not my fault. That's Texas. They're an oil country. They're their own economy. And Texas wants to join BRICS. Why not? Just to take it in BRICS. Because, hey, if World War III does happen and BRICS ends up winning, Texas has the upper hand, right? Yeah, that's why. Okay, they're protecting their ass and assets. Now, while nations differ politically and economically, they share a common interest in increasing their ability to conduct trade and finance outside the traditional Western-centered system. Now, part of that effort involves discussing new payment channels and settlement mechanisms that do not rely entirely on the U.S. dollar. So, some proposals involve linking national digital currencies. Others involve expanding regional banking networks or settling certain trade agreements in local currencies. But none of these initiatives have yet replaced the global reach of the existing financial architecture, but their existence, it sure signals that a gradual shift in financial thinking is underway. So we need to prepare for BRICS coming in. It doesn't look like they are going away. So this shift should not be misunderstood as an overnight revolution. It's been going on for at least 30 years now, especially with BRICS and them being a central bank that gives out loans. They just haven't created their own dollar to trade with, like their own note, their promissory note. Now, the dollar remains deeply embedded in global trade, yes, financial markets, yes, and central bank reserves. Yes. Changing such a system takes time because it involves rewriting decades of infrastructure, banking relationships, legal frameworks, financial instruments, and trust systems between institutions. And even countries that explore alternatives often continue operating within the dollar system for larger portions of their trade simply because it remains the most efficient and widely accepted medium, the dollar. And the world screaming, hey, the U.S. are being a bunch of assholes. We don't want to use their money anymore, so we want to trade with something else, something that may give us a loan for less interest. And this is kind of, U.S.'s fault. And us posturing and, puffing up our feathers, well, that's just what happens when you bully the neighborhood. But eventually, one of the kids is going to stand up and they're going to punch back. That's what's happening. However, the discussion itself reveals something important. Large emerging economies want options, all right? They want financial pathways that actually allow them to trade, invest, and manage reserves without depending entirely on institutions that they do not control or they don't trust. And from their perspective, diversification offers strategic flexibility in a world where economic sanctions and financial pressure have become tools of geopolitical competition. So for the United States and its allies, this trend introduces a different kind of strategic challenge. The dollar system has provided enormous advantages for decades, including deep financial markets, strong global demand for dollar assets, and the ability to influence international economic conditions. Now, when other nations begin exploring alternatives, even slowly, policymakers naturally pay attention because those shifts could gradually reshape the financial balance of power. So this is why discussions about BRICS often appear alongside conversations about energy markets, trade routes, and military alliances. This is all spring, so you're just going to have to get used to it. So they operate within a larger framework of geopolitics and global commerce, and when economic blocs form, they may influence supply chains, investment flows, and diplomatic relationships. Yet it is equally important to maintain the perspective here. The emergence of new financial initiatives does not mean the existing system disappears overnight. Instead, the world appears to be entering a period where multiple economic centers are growing at the same time. Two central banks, BRICS and Federal Reserve. Rather than replacing one system immediately, okay, these developments introduce competition and diversification into the global financial landscape, meaning the United States is going to have to just get used to BRICS owning a certain percentage of loans and contracts worldwide. And this little choke point is the negotiation factor, because America knows that, or the Federal Reserve knows, that the BRICS isn't going away. So here's the negotiation. They want to push it back down. Okay. Right now, believe it or not, BRICS has been able to gain 30% in control of all loans worldwide. And that means that what that means is 30% of the currencies that are going through the world are now controlled by BRICS, and 70% are controlled by the Federal Reserve. Okay, that's pretty big. Now you go, well, what about the franc? None of that matters. Those are just other central banks, but I'm talking about the big one, the one that is being traded in oil. That's where we're really talking about here. All those other ones are nothing compared to the Federal Reserve and the dollar, period. So periods of transition like this can actually produce tension because old structures and emerging structures overlap for many years, and nations experiment with new arrangements while still operating within established frameworks. Governments test new alliances while maintaining existing partnerships, and the result in a world that feels unsettled, even though the challenges and changes themselves are unfolding gradually. In understanding this context, it should help explain why financial discussions often appear alongside geopolitical events. And this isn't a holy war. This isn't about the Third Temple. This isn't about jihad. This isn't about terrorism. This isn't about drugs. This is simply about two central banks and a negotiation, because they both know that someone has to give on each end. Some want more, some want less, some want more, the other wants less. Well, they both want more, but some want more, and then the other opposite wants them to have less. And eventually they're going to come to an agreement, and Iran is that agreement. So this is why America appears to be not winning the war. Okay? This is a slow process here. They don't care if bases hit. No big freaking deal. Who gives a shit? Rebuild. That's great for the American economy. Who's going to build the bases? Americans. Blow them up. They just rebuild. This is great for the U.S. economy. So when they say they're blowing up American bases, oh my God, America, we're looking like we're a bunch of pussies. Well, we are pussies when it comes to, masculinity in the military. Sorry, but, when you guys started going DEI and started fucking around with, what a real soldier is. Anyway. Understanding this context helps explain why financial discussions often appear alongside geopolitical events. And when economic systems begin shifting, countries naturally become more attentive to energy supply, trade routes, and strategic partnerships. Now, each of these elements influences the other, and creating a complex web of incentives and pressures. And this brings us to another piece of the puzzle that has recently drawn some attention. If energy supply and financial systems are both under pressure, then access to large oil reserves becomes strategically significant. And that reality helps explain why one particular country has suddenly reappeared in global conversation about energy supply, and that's Venezuela. That was the clue for me. I'm like, I don't know you guys understand, but that changed everything. I didn't even think or know that Venezuela was going to be a U.S. asset. I did not. I wasn't even prepared for that. And after that, I stopped worrying about governments and World War III, et cetera, because that just sealed America and its U.S. dollars. So when people begin looking at the energy side of the global system, one country appears on the map in a way that often surprises them, and that's Venezuela, as it holds the largest proven oil reserves on the planet. One of four, we've got it, it's ours. And it's close to home. And for decades, those reserves represented one of the most powerful energy assets in the Western Hemisphere. Yet for many years, they were largely removed from global influence due to political turmoil, economic collapse, sanctions, and the deterioration of the country's own energy infrastructure. till China came in and said, we make you a deal. We build infrastructure, you give us oil. So this created an unusual situation. A nation sitting on an enormous quantities of oil was producing far less than its potential. And refineries actually fell into despair. Production equipment aged, and international companies reduced their presence in the country. And as Venezuela's domestic crisis deepened, its role in global oil markets shrank dramatically compared to what it had been during earlier decades. But energy markets never forget large reserves. Even when production declines, the knowledge that massive resources exist beneath the ground remains important to global strategists. And countries with large reserves represent potential supply that could eventually re-enter the market if political or economic conditions change. Well, in comes Venezuela. So for governments trying to manage global energy stability, that potential matters. And in recent years, Venezuela has quietly reappeared in discussions about global oil supply. Not because its production suddenly surged overnight, it did. They're doing 1 million barrels a day. That's a lot. Not because production suddenly surged overnight, but because policymakers around the world recognize that reopening access to those reserves could influence the balance of energy markets and stop everyone worried about the petrodollar through Saudi Arabia and just force Venezuela to take the dollar. It's a win-win. So when other supply routes appear uncertain or when geopolitical tensions rise elsewhere, the existence of large untapped reserves becomes strategically relevant again. So for the United States in particular, Venezuela sits close to home geographically, and its crude oil is very heavy and well suited for certain American refineries that were originally designed to process similar grades. So historically, Venezuelan crude flowed regularly into the United States before sanctions and political disputes disrupted that trade. And because of this infrastructure, change in policy toward Venezuela can quickly influence North American energy supply chains. So reintroducing Venezuelan oil into the global system is not a simple process. Production infrastructure must be repaired, political agreements must be negotiated, and financial channels must be established. Even when sanctions are relaxed or policy changes, it takes time for wells, pipelines, and export facilities to operate at meaningful capacity again. Now, oil production is not like flipping a switch. It actually requires investment, maintenance, and stable conditions. However, the strategic significance remains very clear. A country with the world's largest reserves represents a potential source of stability in times when other regions experience disruption. Policymakers looking at the global energy map understand that bringing additional supply online can reduce pressure on prices and provide flexibility during periods of geopolitical tension. So this is why Venezuela appears repeatedly in conversations, all about energy policy whenever global supply becomes uncertain. And its reserves function almost like a reserve valve within the system, one that cannot be opened instantly, but that remains part of the long-term energy equation. So understanding this dynamic helps explain why energy policy and geopolitics often intersect. Now, nations do not only look at where oil is currently flowing, they also look at where it could flow in the future if conditions change. And as we examine this system even more closely, another important element actually emerges. Energy supply is only one side of this equation. The other side is the industrial network that produces the equipment, technology, and weapons that are all used during periods of geopolitical tension, and that industrial network plays a significant role in how modern conflicts unfold. Basically, it's like this. War is good for America's economy. That's why we have the Department of War. They changed it from the Pentagon to Department of War. War is not going anywhere. As long as we manufacture weapons and sell it to other countries, sell it to our military, that creates jobs. Sorry. But that's how they have it set up, and they like it. Now, whenever conflict breaks out anywhere in the world, another system quietly moves into motion behind the scenes. And it is not the battlefield itself, but the industrial network that supplies the equipment used on those battlefields. Modern warfare is no longer sustained by small workshops or isolated factories. Modern warfare depends on enormous manufacturing ecosystems that stretch across entire countries and sometimes across entire alliances. And remember, Trump was saying, we're going to bring manufacturing back to America. Well, he wasn't thinking manufacturing boots and pants and hats and buckets and chairs and all the shit that China makes. No, he's talking about war equipment. So it depends on an enormous manufacturing ecosystem that stretches across entire countries. So missiles, radar systems, interceptors, drones, aircraft components, and advanced electronics are the products of highly specialized engineering and long supply chains. And that money goes from the Federal Reserve to the banks, to those companies, to our pockets after we work for them, and then that goes back into the economy. That's a circulating system that works for America. Now, a single precision-guided missile may contain components produced by dozens of subcontractors, microchips, propulsion systems, guidance units, sensors, and software modules that must all function together with remarkable accuracy. So building these systems requires years of research, testing, and industrial coordination. And because of this complexity, the defense industry operates differently from most sectors of the economy. Production lines are often designed around long-term government contracts rather than daily market demand. So governments maintain stockpiles of weapons during peacetime, but those stockpiles can be consumed quickly when conflicts intensify. And believe it or not, a fucking missile has a deadline. It's got a date. What do they call it? An expiration date. Okay? Must use by this time. Or gunpowder starts to go, eat away at itself. I don't know. But you can't just build a bunch of missiles, have them sitting there, and they'll be perfect forever. So they got to be used. So what a perfect way than to use them all up during Iran. So when that happens, defense manufacturers must increase production to replace what has been used. So oil prices are going to go up, yes, but so are jobs. We're going to be getting jobs again. Get used to your children working in manufacturing companies, polishing bullet shells. So in the United States, this industrial base includes several major defense contractors, along with hundreds of smaller companies that supply parts and specialized technologies. Okay, now these firms, they manufacture many of the missile systems, aircraft components, and electronic warfare equipment that's been used by the military and its allies. So not just the military, dude, people are buying up from all over the world. And when tensions rise internationally, orders for these systems often increase as governments replenish their inventories and strengthen defense capabilities. So that's coming. Now, the impact of this process extends far beyond a handful of companies. Defense manufacturing supports a wide network of engineers, machinists, technicians, and research laboratories. And universities conduct research that feeds the military technology. So small manufacturing firms produce precision parts that become components inside our larger systems. So logistics companies move materials between facilities, and what appears on the surface as a single weapons program often represents the work of thousands of people across multiple industries. And also, just keep in mind, you're not going to believe this, but war isn't going anywhere. I'm sorry, Jesus said so. It's coming all the way to the end of days, because they go, Master, what will the end times be like? And he's like, there'll be wars and rumors of wars. Shit. So get used to it, okay? So for this reason, periods of geopolitical tension often lead to renewed investment in defense manufacturing. This means the Federal Reserve is going to be loaning more dollars to corporations in America. This is good for our economy. And governments may increase budgets for missile production because we're running out now in Iran, and expand research into new technologies, or even accelerate the development of next generation systems. We got to use all the shit we already created so we can start creating more, baby. So these investments are usually framed in terms of national security, but they also influence employment, industrial capacity, and technological innovation. What this means is Trump isn't losing sleep. Xi Jinping isn't losing sleep. Russia isn't losing sleep. Iran is, because, well, they're not a strong country being used as a proxy for these great powers to make money and build weapons and keep this thing going. So at the same time, it's important to understand that defense production does not expand instantly. Factories cannot simply double output overnight. And skilled workers must be trained, as supply chains must secure materials, and manufacturing equipment must operate within precise tolerances. So this means that when wars consume large quantities of weapons, the industrial base must gradually scale up production to keep pace. And when war stops, then they lose their jobs because they don't need to keep up with the pace. And then they got to figure out another way to keep the economy going. So this dynamic explains why conversations about missile stockpiles and defense manufacturing appear frequently during periods of conflict. Military planners must constantly balance the rate at which weapons are used with the rate at which they can be replaced. So the sustainability of a military campaign depends on not only strategy, but also on the ability of the industrial system to supply the necessary equipment. And since we've been always at war, we were in, 6 different wars right now? Since we're always at war, we always are manufacturing shit. So we're going to be okay. And everyone freaks out. So understanding the role of the defense industry, it really should help reveal another layer of the global system, as conflicts are not fought only on battlefields. They are supported by vast industrial networks that produce the tools of modern warfare. And when geopolitical tensions rise, these networks become increasingly active as governments prepare for uncertain conditions. And this also, you guys think that America lost the Vietnam War. No, we didn't. We just went in there to buy our time so that we could start the war machine after World War II. We needed that after North Korea, or after Korea, because we split up Korea, we split up Vietnam, and we're going to continue doing the same with other countries. It's rinse, lather, repeat, okay? And every country looks different when they split it up, but split up they are. But this leads to an important question. Not all conflicts follow the same pattern. They don't. Just like, Vietnam isn't split into 2 places visibly, but it is. Just like Iran isn't split into 2 places visibly, but it is. So some escalate into long-term wars involving large armies in occupied territories. Others operate very differently, relying on strategic pressure rather than permanent invasion. So recognizing that difference should help explain the nature of the conflict that we are currently witnessing. And so far by now, and I'm only halfway done, you guys should be at ease knowing this is not World War III. This is just Tuesday. Now, not every war is designed to end the same way. When people hear the word war, they often imagine large armies crossing borders, cities being occupied, and conflicts lasting for years and even decades. Well, history certainly contains many examples of those kinds of wars, sure. But modern geopolitics also include another kind of conflict, one that relies more on pressure than on permanent occupation. A pressure campaign works very differently from a traditional invasion. Instead of committing hundreds of thousands of troops to hold territory, governments use a combination of air power, naval forces, economic pressure, and strategic strikes to force a rival to change its behavior. Now, the goal is not necessarily to conquer land or replace an entire government. The goal is to create enough strategic and economic pressure that negotiations become the most attractive option for the opposing trade. It's bullying at its best. Now, these campaigns openly rely heavily on technology, as precision-guided missiles, surveillance systems, cyber capabilities, and naval patrols all allow powerful nations to project force without maintaining massive ground armies in hostile territories. So strategic infrastructure such as military bases, weapons facilities, or supply networks, well, they may be targeted in order to weaken an adversary's ability to respond effectively. So economic measures often accompany these operations. Sanctions, trade restrictions, financial pressure, and diplomatic isolation can reinforce the military dimension of a pressure campaign. So together they form a strategy designed to influence behavior while avoiding the enormous costs associated with long-term occupation. So history provides several examples of this approach. Air campaigns and naval blockades have been used repeatedly over the past several decades to compel rivals to negotiate or to limit their military capabilities. And these operations can still be intense and dangerous, but they typically aim to reach a point where leverage has been established rather than to continue indefinitely. And one of the reasons governments prefer pressure campaigns is the cost of occupation wars. Large ground invasions require enormous logistical support, sustained political commitment, and the willingness to accept significant casualties over long periods of time. And they also create complex challenges after the fighting stops, including rebuilding infrastructure, maintaining order, and managing political transitions inside the occupied territory. Oh, and destroying a city, leveling it out, all the billionaires just love that because they make money off rebuilding that shit. They're like, "Ooh, we get to make more money." it's a war's a racket. So because of these realities, many modern military strategists focus on limited objectives rather than total conquest. So leaders often seek to demonstrate strength, restore deterrence, or force negotiations without becoming trapped in an open-ended conflict. And when the strategic objective has been achieved, or when the economic or political cost begin rising too quickly, governments start searching for ways to step back, which we're going to start seeing here probably within at least 2 months, or at most 2 months. Now, this distraction is most important when analyzing current events. If a conflict shows signs of large troop mobilizations or extended occupation planning and long-term governance strategies, it may indicate a war designed to last for years. That's not what we're seeing here. Trump isn't adding any troops into Iran. They don't plan on it. So when people say, "Oh my God, there's troops," it's not going to happen. But if the operations rely primarily on airstrikes, which we're seeing, naval presence, and economic pressure, it often suggests a campaign aimed at reaching a specific leverage point. And we're not there. Now, Trump said it was going to be 4 days. Well, they knew it was going to be 4 days. But they had to tell the American people something because we're going, we hate Trump. But if the operations rely primarily on airstrikes, naval presence, and economic pressure, it often suggests a campaign aimed at reaching a specific leverage point. So that leverage point becomes the moment when both sides recognize that continuing the conflict may cost more than negotiating an outcome. So when that moment arrives, the focus shifts from applying pressure to finding an exit that allows each side to claim some form of strategic success. So understanding the difference between these two types of conflict helps reduce confusion during moments of crisis. Not every war is intended to expand indefinitely. Some are designed to push a situation to a threshold where diplomacy becomes unavoidable. But recognizing that threshold requires watching for certain patterns. War rarely ends with a sudden announcement. Instead, a series of signals usually begins appearing before governments openly acknowledge that a conflict is winding down. Now, when governments begin preparing to step away from a conflict, they rarely announce it immediately, as wars almost never end with the simple declaration that the objectives have actually been met. But instead, a series of signals begins to appear, sometimes quietly, sometimes gradually, and that reveals a shift taking place behind the scenes. Observers who understand these signals can often recognize the beginning of de-escalation long before the official statements are made. So think about that because you're going to start seeing that. Now, one of the earliest signs is a subtle change in political language. At the beginning of a conflict, leaders tend to use strong and uncompromising rhetoric. The language focuses on victory, punishment, or decisive action. But when the pressure phase begins reaching its limits, the tone slowly shifts. Words like stabilization, deterrence, regional security, and protecting trade routes, that begins replacing the language of escalation. So governments start framing the situation less as a battle to be won and more as a problem to be managed, which we're starting to see now. Another signal is the appearance of diplomatic back channels. Even during intense conflicts, communication between adversaries rarely stops completely. Instead, messages begin traveling through intermediaries. Neutral or semi-neutral countries often serve as quiet messengers, carrying proposals, warnings, and conditions from one side to the other. Now, these conversations may remain hidden from the public for some time, but leaks and hints often begin appearing in diplomatic reporting. So when news begins circulating about envoys traveling quietly or talks taking place through intermediaries, well, that usually means an off-ramp. An off-ramp is being explored. So military posture also begins to change as conflicts approach a plateau, and earlier stages of war often involve rapid escalation, new deployments, expanding operations, and frequent strikes. When governments begin considering de-escalation, these patterns often slow. Military forces shift from aggressive operations to containment roles. And naval forces focus more on protecting shipping lanes than expanding offensive strikes. Now, air operations become more selective rather than constant. And the goal becomes preventing the conflict from expanding rather than intensifying it. So economic signals can appear as well. Energy markets and shipping routes react quickly to geopolitical tensions. And when governments start encouraging stabilization, then insurance premiums for tankers and the traffic may begin to fall. And commercial vessels gradually resume normal routes. And energy prices begin stabilizing rather than climbing sharply. Well, these shifts often reflect quiet assurances between governments that escalation will remain limited. So all the information you're getting from social media and from the news, everyone is in fear and in panic, and they're not giving you the real story. Because the real story is this little thing with Iran is not that big of a deal. And it's not a big deal to China. It's not a big deal to Russia. It's not a big deal to America. In fact, Russia and China are welcoming this because it means that BRICS is going to be established. And that means that the West is bowing a knee to giving them a certain percentage through negotiations. So this is a welcomed opportunity for BRICS. And it's not really good for the Orsini family. So financial markets tend to detect these changes very early. Investors watch geopolitical signals closely because prolonged war carries enormous economic risk. When traders begin believing that a conflict is approaching its peak rather than expanding indefinitely, market behavior often reflects that expectation. Excuse me, my God. Hey, Boots, do me a favor. Do you understand what I'm talking about here? And Boots, tell me, do you feel better knowing that this isn't that big of a deal? Just 70% through this show? Because I was going to do this show this morning, but this morning, dude, all I saw were people freaking out, war drums, protests, people thinking that we're all going to die. And I had no choice because I see no one else de-escalating this problem and trying to tell people that this is just, this is normal. This isn't anything to worry about. This is stabilizing a new kid in town, and this is negotiating terms between the bully and the kid who finally stood up for itself. So energy prices stabilize, defense stocks stop surging, and currencies react to the perception that geopolitical risk is beginning to level off. So finally, domestic political messaging begins evolving. And governments eventually need to explain to their own populations why a conflict occurred and what it accomplished. And they'll have a story ready to go. And when leaders begin emphasizing that security had been restored, deterrence has been reestablished, or national interests have been protected, it often signals that the internal narrative for ending the operation is being prepared. But none of these signals appear alone. Wars rarely end because of a single event. Instead, these patterns begin appearing together, gradually forming a picture that the pressure phase has reached its limit and that diplomacy is taking over the stage. So understanding these signals is extremely important because it allows observers to move beyond the daily noise of headlines. I'm giving you guys clues here. I'm giving you like actual tools on what to look for when all of this stuff arises. So while news reports often focus on individual strikes or dramatic statements, the deeper indicators of de-escalation develop actually slowly beneath the surface, and we're starting to see a little bit of it now. So when several of these signals begin appearing at the same time, it usually means that governments have already begun discussing how the conflict will end, even if the public announcement has not yet arrived. So this whole escalation, this whole thing, and everyone's saying, this is Trump, and he's going to kill us all. No, Trump's not worried about it. They got pictures of Trump yelling at his people. They got people resigning. Dude, be mad at all you want. You're just giving yourself you're just giving yourself fear when you don't need to. You're hurting your own self by being scared. And I can't help you other than give you a show that has enough probability points and proof to show that this is really not that big of a deal. And Boot says, yes, and I'm wondering why people are still freaking listening to the news. Right. So one of the most powerful forces during any geopolitical crisis is not missiles, it's not ships, it's not the markets. It's the speed at which fear spreads through information systems. In the modern world, people do not experience war only through events themselves. They experience it through a constant stream of headlines, alerts, social media posts, and commentary that never stops moving. And all that's created on purpose because they want you to live in fear because, hey, the more you live in fear, the more you're going to need them. That's all. The more you're scared, the more you're going to pay your taxes. Well, we need them. We need them to protect us from Iranians. It's the Libyans. Oh. Well, the result is that a single strike can feel like the beginning of a world-ending conflict. Feel like it. And a rumor can travel across millions of screens before anyone has time to even confirm it. And dramatic predictions capture attention, and attention drives the algorithms that shape the information that people see. And in that environment, the most frightening interpretation often spreads faster than the most accurate one. So this pattern is not new, folks. It's not. Throughout history, periods of uncertainty have produced waves of speculation. And during wars, markets, and political upheaval, people try to predict what will happen next because the future is uncertain, right? And those predictions may lean toward worst-case scenarios. Human psychology naturally prepares for danger by imagining the most extreme outcomes. So modern communication amplifies that instinct, and 24-hour news cycles compete for attention. And analysts are asked to predict outcomes before events have fully developed. And social media platforms reward emotional reactions more than careful explanations, as we saw when Bibi, Netanyahu, and Trump were bringing influencers to their office and actually paying them to tell them what to say. Did you not see that part? Right. So another factor is the complexity of the systems involved, as energy markets, global finance, military strategy, and international diplomacy are not simple topics. They involve layers of institutions. Remember, we learned that institutions shape policy, not government officials. Long-term agreements and technical processes that are difficult to explain in short bursts of commentary. Now, because those systems are complicated, simplified narratives often replace deeper explanations. And when simplified narratives take hold, they can produce the impression that events are spiraling out of control, which is why I had to write this morning. And yet the analysts step back and examine the structures behind those events. A different picture often emerges. Okay, everyone thinks all the U.S. bases all around Iran are completely pummeled and wiped out. No, they just send one missile in each one of them. And they said trillions of dollars are wiped out. Seriously? Do you understand what $1 trillion is and what that buys? It's over sensationalizing something. They're literally, people, even other countries are saying, America is duped. America's screwed. America has lost the war already. When this wasn't a war to begin with, this was a posture strategy to force negotiations. That's all. This is not war. It's not war. Even though they've been using Iran all these years and sending missiles in Iran, having Iran send missiles back. This isn't anything new, but everyone thinks that this is brand new. This hasn't ever happened throughout history. We are all Alzheimer's. All of us have dementia because we cannot simply remember what happened last year when we sent B-2 bombers to blow the shit up in Iran. Now, this does not mean that conflicts are harmless or that risks are imaginary. No, people are dying. But that's because greedy men, and I'm not going to say women because I don't think women are in control of this world, but greedy men just don't want to give up their old way of making money. So war always carries the potential for escalation, and miscalculations can have serious consequences. But understanding the systems involved should help separate genuine danger from exaggerated panic. It should remind you guys that global events are shaped by incentives, constraints, and strategic calculations rather than by chaos alone. It should. Now, when people focus only on the immediate conflict, it can feel as if the world has suddenly become unstable. But history often reveals that moments like this are part of something even larger, as major shifts in global power rarely happen quietly. They unfold through periods of tensions as old systems adjust to new realities. It's true. And recognizing that larger process, as transitions can be very noisy, it should allow you guys to take a step back from the fear generated by daily events and see the underlying pattern here. A world in transition, negotiating the balance between established power and emerging influence while still relying on the interconnected systems that bind it all together. So to conclude, when the noise of the headlines fades for just a moment and the larger systems are examined, the situation begins to look different from the panic that many people feel. You can now see who is very emotionally unstable in this world and those who are not. This is separating the wheat from the tares. And the world is not collapsing overnight, folks. What we're witnessing in a moment when several powerful forces like energy markets, financial systems, military pressure, and emerging economic alliances are all pressing against each other at the same time. Oil routes remain vital to the global economy, and any tension near those trade routes immediately captures the attention of governments and markets. So the dollar still sits at the center of much of the global financial system, even as the economic blocs explore alternatives. Nations with large energy reserves suddenly regain importance when supply chains actually tighten. And the defense industry becomes even more active whenever geopolitical pressure arises. And for the public watching these events unfold, the most important response is not to panic, but understand that fear thrives when people feel events are random and uncontrollable. And if you feel that all of this is random and uncontrollable, you're not paying attention. You're living in fear. And you must like it because you're not changing. You're not trying to find ways to get out of it. And when the system behind those events become visible, like it is right now, if you just paid attention, the situation begins to make more sense. Energy flows, financial incentives move, military offers strategy, and diplomatic pressure all follow these patterns that have appeared many times before. So what I'm saying is there's nothing new under the sun, people. So while the present conflict may appear dramatic, it is better understood as part of that larger process. Pressure rises, nations test boundaries, and negotiations eventually follow when the incentives for stability become stronger than the incentives for escalation. And think about this. And this is just, come on. How come Iran continues to bring up a new leader for America to approve? They're literally bringing up different people, and they're waiting for America to approve. Doesn't that show you that America has the upper hand here? Why are you freaking out? So perspective here, guys. Perspective. Perspective is the most valuable tool during moments like this. When the machinery behind global events become clear, panic begins to fade. And what remains is far more sober understanding of how power, energy, finance, and diplomacy interact to shape the world that we live in. And when that understanding replaces fear, people are able to watch events unfold with clearer eyes, recognizing that even in times of tension, the global system is constantly searching for equilibrium rather than permanent chaos. Sorry. This is how it is. This is how I see it. This is the information that I got, and these are the conclusions I've been coming to. And it's only because I'm holding myself more accountable to the truth. This has been Cause Before Symptom. Sorry I was late tonight, guys. Stick around tomorrow when God gives me another revelation to tell you guys all about. God bless you. God keep you. God thank you. Don't forget to buy elitepotion.com. Get rid of parasites and heavy metals the best way because, hey, it is expensive. Yes, I agree, but it's the best on the market. elitepotion.com. God bless you. God keep you, and we'll see you guys mañana.
This has been Cause Before Symptom with your host, James Carner. Go to his website, jamescarner.com, and sign up for his newsletter. Also, download his free books on the breath war, the crown of blood, and the ritual machine. Fix your body by buying his award-winning detox formula, removing heavy metals and parasites. You'll feel better and live longer. Go to elitepotion.com. And one more thing, please. Just try and love your neighbor, because if you do, the world would be a better place. See you tomorrow.